Hello, my name is Amanda Kotila. I'm in the first year of my master's in Earth and Atmospheric Science. I work in the Watershed Science and Modeling Laboratory. And this is an overview of my project called a Coupled Glacier Mass Balance Evolution Model for Projecting Changes in the Albertan Rocky Mountain Glacier Runoff. Come on, next slide. There we are. So I'll be talking about the importance of this research topic and some of my research objectives for this project, then go into my study area, some basics of glacier modeling, and then some specifics about my particular model, and then looking at projections and outcomes of this project. So to begin with, my study area are the glaciers of Alberta. There are more than 700 glaciers in Alberta, coming to a total ice volume of approximately 55 cubic kilometers. It has been found that in some areas of the province, ice field melt runoff contributes up to 80% of seasonal river discharge. So in the summer, when there is melt, it goes downstream and can be quite a large part of downstream flows in parts of the province. And that is currently. Considering the glacier response in climate change scenarios, that may change. Not only the amount of meltwater that is injected into streams, but the timing as well may change over time as the glaciers respond to changes in the climate. And so that meltwater impacts the stream system, not only the amount, but the temperature of the meltwater has downstream ecological, agricultural, and municipal impact. So my research objectives are to couple a temperature index glacier mass balance model to a dynamic evolution model. So the mass of the glacier is changing, and what is the glacier's response to that change in mass? Adding some refinements to that model and applying it to the large study area. And then using that model to model melt runoff of the Albertan Canadian Rocky Mountain glaciers and project future melt runoff under various climate warming scenarios. So this is an overview of my study area. Most of the glaciers in Alberta are along the western edge here in the Rocky Mountains. The schematic shows the location of the glaciers and some of the watersheds that they feed. That's also shown in this table. So here are some of the watersheds. This is the number of glaciers in that watershed and the glacier area, the coverage that they have in that watershed. My study area, we are working at quite a high resolution for our modeling purposes. So let me do a quick overview of glacier modeling. One way to study glaciers is to consider their change in mass. What is their response year to year change in mass? And a lot of those changing processes happen at the surface, so they're considered a glacier surface mass balance. And the net change in a glacier's mass can be considered the difference between the accumulation and the ablation. So how much mass it has gained versus how much mass it has lost is the net change in mass. So looking at this schematic of a glacier, the downstream or terminus end is often considered the ablation area, where ablation processes primarily melt is what happens with mountain glaciers. It loses mass down here. You know, if it's warm in the summer, it's at a lower elevation. Whereas the upper end tends to be the accumulation area. It's at a higher elevation. Precipitation kind of accumulates here on the glacier surface, which is shown in this image of a glacier. There's quite a distinct line here between the accumulation area. You still see the snowpack on here where it has gained some mass. And down here, ablation processes dominate, and it's actually feeding this lake. So in our model, to simulate these processes, we use a temperature index model approach, which relates accumulation and ablation processes to the air temperature. So this is a schematic of some of the workings of our model, which is a coupled glacier mass balance dynamic evolution model. It's broken into two parts. So we have the melt module that simulates the change in mass, and then the glacier evolution, how it responds to that change in mass. So here again is the temperature index model It uses temperature to see if accumulation or ablation processes dominate, and then calculate the net glacier surface mass balance. And it does that at the daily time scale. So was it a warm day? Did we have precipitation? Did we have net loss or gain of mass this day? And then it can sum that for the whole year. So did this glacier experience net loss or gain of mass this year? Once it has done that for the year and reached that total, that then becomes an input to the second part of the model, where it takes that net change in mass as well as some inputs about the glacier itself, so its surface area, its thickness, and it can calculate a change in volume of the glacier. And then it does a volume area scaling relation to calculate the net change in area of the glacier. So if we had quite a bit of mass loss, how does the glacier respond in its new area in the landscape? That new area also tells you the quantity of melt runoff. So if we had a loss of mass, this new area, the inverse of that is the melt runoff. And then that becomes an input into the next year if you are running for multiple years. So we have a new area, a new amount of mass then goes in, and it just cycles through this daily and then at the yearly time scale for as many years as you wish to run the model. So again, looking at some of the details, the temperature index model, doing the accumulation and melt processes, it needs some meteorological inputs to do this. So your daily precipitation and temperature, some other things such as the threshold temperature, when is it going to melt if it's warm enough, the changes in temperature and precipitation as you move to higher or lower elevation along the glacier. Currently, the model runs as a classical temperature index model, so it takes these inputs and calculates a degree day factor, also known as a melt coefficient, for both the snow and the ice per day. So with all these things going on this day, has it melted the snow or ice a certain amount? This does not account for melt due to other energy inputs, that is radiation. It's only a factor of temperature. So a refinement to this model would be to use the Pelliciotti temperature index model. So not only the temperature melt factor, but then looking at energy inputs from radiation. So is there direct solar radiation? Is shortwave and long wave affecting the melt of snow of ice? Is the albedo of the snow and ice affecting how much radiation it's absorbing? So we wish to add this to the model. Then looking at what does the future hold, the big question, right? So in order to do the melt projections, I have a few steps to complete in that. So first of all, I need to downscale the future climate data. So as I said earlier, we're working at quite a high resolution, which we don't have for our climate data, our future climate data. Those tend to be at the global climate model scale or a regional climate model scale, which is quite larger. So how do I appropriately downscale those to represent the microclimate near these glaciers? If I know that, then I can properly model their response to the changes in the microclimate in this region. So that's our initial big challenge at present. Once we know the climate, we can then use it as an input into the model to run our melt runoff projections under various climate warming scenarios, and then analyze the downstream impacts of that melting. So these are the key hypotheses that I'm working under and kind of our outcomes that we expect. So refinements of the model, i.e. adding this radiation factor, will improve the simulated melt runoff of the model. And then that will allow us to have better outcomes with our projections. So we expect that the model will indicate a net loss of mass in the region. That is, glacier melt will be injected into downstream. And so what are the possible impacts of that? So this has been a quick overview of my project. Thank you for your attention. These are my acknowledgements, and I'm happy to take questions or feedback at this time.